Hi, this is Mrs. Kidman, and in this video, we're going to be discussing the difference between theoretical probability and experimental probability. So theoretical probability is what we expect to get. So a great example of that is if you roll a dice, you expect to get a 1/6 of the time. Or if you flip a coin, you expect to get heads half the time. Experimental probability is what we actually get. So what happens if I actually roll a dice 10 times? How many ones do I get? If I actually flip a coin 10 times, how many heads do I get? A great example of when we see this in the real world is when we are playing board games. So a board game that I love to play that's a perfect example of this is Settlers of Catan. The way that that game works is you are building these settlements on these different corners of pieces of land, and each piece of land has a different number on it. And you roll 2 dice and then add them together, and depending on what that number is, you get, if that number is a 6, if your settlement's built on the corner of a 6, you get whatever sort of supply that gives you. Now, a lot of people like to build on 6s, 8s, 5s, and 9s. The reason why is because the probability of rolling 2 dice and getting a sum of 6 is a lot higher than rolling 2 dice and getting the sum of 3, for example. And so the theoretical probability says the best places to build your settlements are going to be on 6s, 8s, 5s, 9s, anything you can do to get those high probability numbers. However, when you actually play, that experimental probability comes into play there. I've had so many games where you're rolling and you're like, why has 3 been rolled so many times this game? The 8 has never been rolled. Statistically, the 8 should be rolled more often than 3. But these theoretical probabilities are based on the equality and the sense that we've done it hundreds of millions of times. And if we do it that many times, then our probability should come out as 1/6. But every time you roll that dice, you have a 1 in 36 chance of getting a 2. Now, can you get that 1 in 36 chance over and over again? Of course. Is the likelihood of that happening high? No. But is it possible? Yes. And so that's what we see, that difference between the theoretical and experimental probabilities. Theoretical probability is what you expect to get. Experimental probability is what we actually get. So let's look at an example here of when we might compare those two. So right here, in each section of the spinner, it has the same area. A spinner here was spun 20 times, and this table below shows the results. Which color is the experimental probability of stopping on the color the same as the theoretical? So when did we actually get what we expected? Which is kind of what we're looking for here. So when did we actually get what we expected? Well, what did we expect to get? Well, for yellow, we expected to get that. If we spun this 20 times, I would expect to get it 5 times because it would be 1/4 of 20. I'd expect to get green 5 times, red 5 times, blue 5 times. Which one did I actually get the same number of times that I expected? I expected to get each of them 5 times. The only one that I actually got was red. So red had the same experimental probability as it did theoretical. Now, what if we look at this next question? So which color is the experimental probability of stopping on the same color greater than the theoretical probability? So which one has a greater value in our experiment than it did theoretically? Well, that would be our green here. In green, we ended up getting a probability that's higher than what we expected to get. For blue and yellow, we actually ended up getting a lower experimental probability than what we anticipated, and that has to compensate for that green one. And so it's cool to see how this experimental probability affects that theoretical. They have this relationship where we expect to get something, but do we actually get that? No. And that's what's really important to take into account here when we're looking at those two probabilities. So that's really the difference. Again, theoretical probability is what we expect to get. Experimental probability is what we actually get. So we call it an experimental probability because we have to experiment or collect data to figure out that probability. Theoretical probability is based on theory. So we don't collect any data and we say, this is what I've been told, so this is what I'm going to expect to get. And that's really the difference between the two.